On the 6th of June 1985, investigators in Brazil dug up the body of a man who'd lain undisturbed for over 6 years. The name on the gravestone said Wolfgang Gerhard, but investigators thought differently. They believed that this coffin contained the remains of one of the world's most notorious war criminals, Josef Mengele. Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, was responsible for some of the most heinous war crimes in history.
This was Auschwitz, the extermination camp in Poland found by the Russians. Here there was evidence of a cold, organized bestiality.
As garrison physician at the Auschwitz death camp in Poland, Mengele's sadism and perverse obsession with the science of racial purity knew no bounds.
I knew that we were at his mercy, and if he wanted us dead, we would be dead.
But after the war, he escaped justice. However, one man would dedicate his life to hunting him down. That man was Simon Wiesenthal.
He is the most emotional case, and he is at the top of the list because a man who has sent to the gas chambers 400,000 people and make inhuman, cruel experiments.
Wiesenthal would pursue Mengele across the world. But the elusive doctor would continually slip through his fingers. So when he learned about the body in Brazil, Wiesenthal's emotions were bittersweet. He now had to accept that Mengele would never be brought to justice.
Who can be sure? But I would say 99%.
This is the story of a Nazi hunt that went wrong. How, despite being one of the world's most wanted men, Josef Mengele became the Nazi who got away. Josef Mengele and Simon Wiesenthal were born 2 years apart, as equals. Mengele, a German and heir to a farm machinery business in the Bavarian town of Günzburg. Wiesenthal, a Jew with a degree in architecture who set up his own business in Lvov, then in Poland, now part of modern-day Ukraine. But the rise of Hitler was to give them very different lives. The Führer had long dreamed of an Aryan master race in Europe. He believed the Jews were an inferior people, and he'd fanned the flames of anti-Semitism both in Germany and Austria, the place of his birth. With the outbreak of war, Hitler was able to export his policy of hate deep into Eastern Europe. In Wiesenthal's home city of Lvov, the Jews were terrorized by their new German masters. By September 1942, most of his and his wife's relatives were dead. Wiesenthal himself was imprisoned in a series of concentration camps, narrowly avoiding liquidation at Janowska outside Lvov. He was later transported to the misery of Mauthausen in Upper Austria. Josef Mengele, meanwhile, was living a very different life. Trained as a doctor in Munich and Frankfurt, at the outbreak of war, Mengele joined the regular army as a medical officer, before transferring to the Waffen-SS Viking Division in 1942. Originally created as Hitler's personal bodyguard, the SS were amongst the most fanatical supporters of the Third Reich. In July 1942, Mengele was caught up in bloody fighting against Russians on the Eastern Front. It was here that the valiant rescue of wounded men from a burning tank earned Mengele the Iron Cross First Class. But Mengele's talents were soon deemed too great for the Russian front. He had, since his student days, fostered a keen interest in the science of racial purity. It was a passion which, after active service, had seen him posted to Berlin at the Nazi Race and Resettlement Office. Together with a group of dedicated SS doctors, Mengele was charged with delivering the science needed to create the Aryan master race. And to help him do it, in May 1943, he got a job that would make him one of the most reviled men in history. He was appointed SS garrison physician at the Auschwitz death camp. Mengele spent 21 months at Auschwitz, becoming notorious as the man who met Jewish refugees as they arrived at the camp. Thought to be the man seen here on the right of the picture, it was he who decided which of the refugees were healthy enough to go to the right, which meant a wretched life in the labor camp, or to the left, where death in the gas chambers awaited the elderly and the infirm. A young dance teacher who survived Auschwitz later wrote of seeing Mengele at work.
He stood before us, the handsome devil who decided life and death. He stood there like a charming dancing master directing a polonaise, a devil who took pleasure in his work. Left and right and left, his hands pointed with casual movements.
But Mengele didn't just let new arrivals live so they could work in the labor camps. He wanted them for medical research. His SS file reveals him as a specialist in genetics and eugenics. Mengele shared Hitler's obsession with racial purity. His dream was to copy the blonde, blue-eyed model of Aryan perfection, exemplified by members of the Hitler Youth, and then develop the means to genetically manufacture it on a massive scale. Auschwitz, Mengele was particularly fascinated by identical twins. Sharing the same genetic blueprint, twins allowed him a unique opportunity to experiment on one and compare the results with the other. Now Mengele was presented with as many twins as he wanted.
These are all identical twins used for medical experiment. Hundreds of twins from all over Europe were brought to this camp. They were numbered, but their origin and even their names are unknown.
One of them was Eva Moses, seen here a day after liberation. Eva remembers meeting Mengele after receiving several toxic injections into her arm.
Then Mengele declared, laughing sarcastically, he said, "Too bad. She's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." I refuse to accept his verdict. I refuse to die.
In all, Mengele murdered 3,000 twins. Some after chemicals were injected directly into their eyeballs. His aim? To turn the color of eyes from inferior brown to Aryan blue. But the Angel of Death didn't just experiment on twins. Any child was useful as a human guinea pig, as were their mothers. He performed countless sterilizations in an effort to develop a quick and easy method which could be applied to entire non-Aryan populations. In other experiments, flesh was burnt to allow him to study healing rates. Whilst subjects were tortured alive in bizarre tests to research the effects of stress on the body. Finally, serving no further use alive, Mengele's victims would be murdered with an injection direct to the heart, so that more experiments could be performed on their corpses. It was horrific work, yet he appeared to have performed it with enthusiasm and zeal. An official citation described him as reliable, upright, and straight, having given a valuable contribution to anthropological science.
There were children who say that Mengele was very good to them, gave them cookies and chocolate, and was kind. I did not experience anything like that. I knew that we were at his mercy, and if he wanted us dead, we would be dead. I also knew that thanks to his experiments, we were alive.
Both Eva's parents and her grandparents died at Auschwitz. Almost certainly, she and her sister would have soon joined them in the gas chambers. But for both, salvation was about to come. In May 1945, the Russians took Berlin. Hitler was dead, and the war was over. Now the Allies were able to reveal the full horror of the Führer's regime.
For the first time, America can believe what they thought was impossible propaganda. Here is documentary evidence of sheer mass murder. Murder that will blacken the name of Germany for the rest of recorded history.
The first camp liberated by the Americans was Ohrdruf, southwest of Berlin. General Eisenhower personally toured the camp to see the horror for himself.
The Supreme Commander sees demonstrations of the torture racks. This murder weapon accounted for hundreds of deaths and the disfigurement of thousands of others. 6 furnaces, each holding 3 bodies, were used in cremating the dead and often the living. Don't turn away, look. Burned alive. Horror unbelievable, yet true.
The British, meanwhile, found similar scenes at Bergen-Belsen in northwest Germany.
I passed through the barrier and found myself in the world of a nightmare. The living lay with their heads against the corpses. This is what the Germans did.
But nothing could prepare the world for what the Russians revealed about Auschwitz. Here it's estimated 1.1 million Jews were liquidated in circumstances unprecedented in human history. However, the SS men responsible, including Josef Mengele, had long since vanished. The job of rounding up suspected war criminals was at first handed to the occupying powers. Mengele would have known that the Americans were out to get him. But what he feared more was capture and probable torture at the hands of the Russians. Which is why, according to his own diaries, the Angel of Death now took the biggest gamble of his life. He gave himself up to the Americans. The story is supported by testimony from several witnesses. One, American guard Walter Kempthorne claimed to have seen Mengele being interrogated inside a prisoner of war camp at Ida Oberstein.
Who are you?
He described him as 5'8", with black, thinning hair.
Stop lying!
Adding the man was identified to him as Mengele, the bastard who sterilized 3,000 women at Auschwitz. But did Kempthorne really see the Angel of Death? Today, the US government says it has no record of ever knowingly detaining Mengele after the war. Instead, they believe he probably did give himself up to American soldiers, but only after first ditching his SS uniform and then adopting a false name. Hiding one's identity in the chaos of post-war Europe was easy. An estimated 3 million Germans had surrendered to occupying forces. Confusingly, 17 men named Josef Mengele had enlisted in the regular army. The Allied prisoner of war camps were swamped. Paperwork and the gathering of names was often left to the German prisoners themselves. With food supplies running short, the prisoners were a huge burden to the Allies, who determined to release them as soon as possible. But that should not have applied to people like Mengele. strict orders were given that no captured members of the reviled SS should be given their freedom. They were the men who had largely carried out so many of the crimes of the final solution. Identifying SS men, however, was difficult. Many, like Mengele, had discarded their SS uniforms in favor of regular army dress. There was, though, one telltale sign that couldn't be removed. All SS were supposed to have been tattooed in the armpit with the name of their blood group. But for some reason, Josef Mengele had never been given the tattoo. Investigators who looked would have seen nothing. Consequently, it's believed that in the summer of 1945, Mengele was released by the Americans along with tens of thousands of others. It was his first great escape. He now weighed up the options and decided to go back to his hometown, Günzburg in Bavaria. It was another calculated risk. Germany was still swarming with Allied troops. Some of them were even sent to question Mengele's family on his whereabouts. But the Nazi code of silence was total, and with the help of family and friends, Mengele now went into hiding. But whilst US investigators soon moved on, one man refused to abandon the trail. In April 1945, Simon Wiesenthal had ended the war at the Mauthausen concentration camp close to the Austrian border. With most of his family dead, Wiesenthal now yearned for justice. Calling upon his incredible memory, he supplied the Allies with the names of dozens of suspected war criminals he'd encountered in the camps. But he wanted to do more. So in 1947, he decided to go full-time as a Nazi hunter, opening an office in the Austrian city of Linz. Manned by 30 volunteers, he called it the Jewish Historical Documentation Center, and its job was to hunt down all Nazi war criminals, including the man who soon rose high on his list, Josef Mengele. Wiesenthal would later learn that Mengele had been arrested for a second time, this time in Vienna. The claim was reported by a US intelligence agent called Benjamin Gorby. His information dated the arrest as December 1946. Gorby's claim has never been proven. Whatever the truth, 3 months after he made it, the first Auschwitz war crimes trial began in Poland. One of the star defendants was the Auschwitz camp commandant, Rudolf Höss. Seen here at Auschwitz, Höss didn't commit his crimes alone. To his right, camp physician Josef Mengele. While his commanding officer was sentenced to death for his role in the Holocaust, Mengele continued to elude the Nazi hunters. Then, in January 1948, one of the Allies' key war crimes investigators, Brigadier General Telford Taylor, wrote a memo that would have a profound effect. Asked why Mengele hadn't been tried at Nuremberg, he stated simply that as of October 1946, Josef Mengele was dead. Which meant no one was now looking for him. In truth, Mengele was very much alive. And despite the presence of Allied soldiers still spread across Europe, he now began planning his next move. Once again, it was fraught with danger, but with money and assistance from his family and other Nazi sympathizers, Mengele decided that it might just be possible to escape Europe altogether. He now began a 500-mile journey. First, he made his way to the Brenner Pass at the Austrian border with Italy. Skillfully dodging border police, he next moved to the Italian town of Vipiteno. His goal here was to await delivery of false papers and cash. Then, after a short stay, he was on the move again, traveling south to Bolzano. Here, a fresh guide arranged for Mengele to get a Red Cross passport at the Swiss consulate. Mengele applied for it with a false name, Helmut Gregor. Still undetected, Mengele's next leg took him 500 miles to a fresh minder and the Italian port of Genoa. After 4 years on the run, Mengele needed one last document to secure his escape from Europe: an Italian exit visa. For a moment, it seemed to go wrong, as Italian officials suspicious of his story threw him in jail. Once again, Mengele was staring at the hangman's noose. But Nazi fixers soon emerged from the shadows, quietly arranging for his release. Finally issued with his exit visa, Mengele boarded the North King for a 7,000-mile voyage. It was May the 26th, 1949, and the entry visa stamped into his passport said, Argentina. Still using the name Helmut Gregor, Buenos Aires was a comfortable place to be a fugitive Nazi. But it wasn't just the relaxed lifestyle that attracted Mengele.
Ella, para nosotros, nació con el justicialismo y lanzarlo hacia los pastos de la historia de la nación.
Since the military coup of 1955, the administration of President Juan Perón and his glamorous wife Eva had captivated the nation. But behind the glamour lay a hardline right-wing regime, one which had turned a blind eye to the arrival of war criminals inside Argentina's borders. It was a regime that allowed a reinvented Mengele to practice as a doctor and run a small pharmaceutical company on the side. Funding for the business was supplied by the family back home.
Dr. Mengele belonged to a family which was very rich. They had a big firm of agricultural equipment, which they were selling all over the world. Carl Mengele and Sons. He was one of the sons. And they found ways to supply him with a lot of money. So, South America at this time, you could make your way by bribing everybody.
It also helped to have friends. and Mengele soon hooked up with other fugitive Nazis. One was Luftwaffe fighter ace Hans Rudel. Rudel had been the Red Baron of World War II. A high-ranking Nazi hero, he would also end up in South America, where he's thought to have become a key player in the Nazis' Old Boys network. One of the network's other members and another friend of Mengele's was Adolf Eichmann. During the war, Eichmann had delivered Hitler the transport infrastructure he needed to send Jews to the death camps. Now, after the Nazi defeat, he too had sought sanctuary in Buenos Aires. Helped by powerful friends and occupying a series of comfortable suburban retreats, in the mid-1950s, Mengele reverted to using his real name. Incredibly, he twice visited the West German embassy to apply for documents in the name of Josef Mengele. Yet no one appeared to have spotted one of the world's most wanted men. It was a breathtaking show of daring and arrogance. Yet once again, Mengele had got away with it.
The way he could allow himself to go to the German embassy and unpunishedly enter and go away and get what he wanted was a part of the members at the time of the clerks at the embassy were just stupid people who didn't know what they're dealing with. And another part were people who were quite sympathetic with the fact that they had so many Germans escaped from the homeland and living here in exile. So in many cases, there was a kind of silent cooperation.
Frustrated at the lack of progress, Simon Wiesenthal didn't disguise his irritation with the German authorities. He had never believed that Mengele was dead, and had himself tracked down the Angel of Death to Buenos Aires. In 1959, he and others persuaded Germany to issue a fresh warrant for Mengele's arrest. But by now, Mengele was on the run again. This time, he was in Paraguay. Still using his real name, the authorities in Asunción helpfully granted him citizenship, and it said, provided him with allies at the highest level. One of them was President Alfredo Stroessner, a right-wing German emigre thought to be sympathetic to the Nazi cause. But despite Stroessner's support, said to have included a military bodyguard, Mengele was now a man living in fear. Little is known about his exact movements around this time, though the sleepy Paraguayan town of Hohenau is said to have been just one of his temporary haunts.
He lived in Paraguay in a place where he was quite protected. We believed he lived in what we call the triangle. There was a part which was quite wild between Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. It was very difficult to get there. And once again, there were voices in Israel saying, how come that we leave the angel of death to live a peaceful life?
One of those voices was Simon Wiesenthal's. He could see that playing by the rules wasn't helping to get Mengele. Soon, though, he would discover that you didn't have to play by the rules. Issa Harel, head of Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, now entered the game. In 1960, he and a 19-strong Mossad team traveled to South America to pursue not Mengele, but his friend and fellow war criminal, Adolf Eichmann. In clear breach of international law, Harel's team kidnapped Eichmann on the streets of Buenos Aires.
It was a tremendous operation. They were in Buenos Aires, and they followed Eichmann, and finally they arrested him. They brought him to a house. They kept him there prisoner, and at one of the most dramatic moments, he said, "Ich bin Adolf Eichmann." They asked him, "Who are you?" He said, "Ich bin Adolf. I am Adolf Eichmann." And he said, "I know I am in the hand of the Israelis."
The operation went like a dream. And while Eichmann was kept blindfolded at a secret Buenos Aires location, Harel now turned his attention to a second target. Harel's intelligence indicated that Mengele, despite moving to Paraguay a year earlier, was still making occasional visits to a safe house in Buenos Aires.
In Buenos Aires, while the team was there, there was an idea that maybe they should look for Mengele, because they had information that Mengele lives in Buenos Aires. As a matter of fact, he was well known among the German community, the expats, the German expats in Buenos Aires.
Harel decided to launch an operation to kidnap Mengele. But then, at the 11th hour, he got cold feet.
They tried to locate him, but then they decided that it's a very bad idea, which really is, to have two operations at the same time. You endanger both of them. It's something that shouldn't be done.
Harel had calculated that he simply couldn't afford to compromise the success of the Eichmann operation. And in any case, it seemed Mengele too had spies.
So Mengele I think he was warned by somebody from the German embassy, and he ran away. But they were considering what to do with Mengele, and then they decided not to follow up the trail.
Days later, an El Al plane left Buenos Aires for Israel. On board was Adolf Eichmann, but not Josef Mengele. Once again, the angel of death had slipped through the net. But Simon Wiesenthal now believed he was coming close to a breakthrough. In Paraguay, he now lobbied President Stroessner to give Mengele up, meanwhile tipping off anyone who would listen about Mengele's last known hideout. It was clear the Auschwitz doctor was no longer safe in either Paraguay or Argentina. So again he decided to seek fresh pastures, this time in Brazil. Rio de Janeiro was an attractive proposition for any newly arrived visitor. But Mengele, now harried by Wiesenthal and others, dared not risk the same high-profile lifestyle he'd had in Argentina. Instead, it's thought he went to work as a humble farm manager in rural Brazil. His landlords, as ever, were Nazi sympathizers who asked few questions, allowing Mengele to live untroubled for a further 7 years. After a brief flurry of interest, it seemed that the world was once again in danger of giving up on Josef Mengele. But not Simon Wiesenthal. He was convinced that the way to get Mengele was to pursue leads in his hometown of Günzburg, where he believed family and friends remained in constant touch.
Today we know that Mengele was in touch with his family in Germany all the time. And it's a very simple matter of, catching his correspondence or breaking into the house of his brother or family, and really, not enough was done.
While the search in Germany stalled, a series of increasingly more fantastic Mengele stories began to reach Wiesenthal's desk. He told the world how in Argentina the Angel of Death had recently been the target of a honey trap. Traced by a beautiful Mossad agent, Mengele was tipped off about a kidnap plot. The woman was later found dead at the bottom of a cliff. In 1962, Wiesenthal targeted an address in Zurich where Mengele's new wife had been spotted. But the Swiss authorities refused to cooperate with an operation to kidnap him. Then 2 years later, these images were flashed around the world. Lasting only 3 seconds, the pictures filmed in Argentina were said to be of Mengele himself. With interest in Mengele now renewed, a Brazilian policeman would later claim to have personally killed him, firing off 4 bullets into the Angel of Death's body. These and countless other stories peddled throughout the 1960s and 1970s were almost certainly fakes. The truth was, no one knew where Mengele was hiding. In early 1985, the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, Simon Wiesenthal visited Jerusalem. He now demanded global action to catch the Angel of Death.
We need Mengele for a German trial, before a German court. A trial of Mengele will be a won battle against the deniers of the Holocaust.
But not everyone agreed. Some, including one Jewish doctor who'd been forced to work at Auschwitz, said Mengele should be left alone.
It's much better to let him where he is, because he is afraid every night. He cannot sleep like a normal man. He is afraid, maybe tomorrow they catch me, or somebody will kill me tomorrow.
Wiesenthal, however, was not persuaded.
Simon Wiesenthal has said he's sure he'll catch Josef Mengele, the Nazi doctor known as the Angel of Death. He said he's certain Mengele is still living in Paraguay, though the Paraguayan leader has said he's not.
In April 1985, Wiesenthal, wrongly believing Mengele was still in Paraguay, was still putting him at the top of his wanted list.
He is the most emotional case, and he is at the top of the list because a man who has sent to the gas chambers 400,000 people and make inhuman, cruel experiments.
Just a few weeks later, the breakthrough everyone wanted came. Police back in Germany were about to crack the Mengele case wide open. In Mengele's hometown of Günzburg, detectives staged a dramatic dawn raid on the home of a Mengele family friend. Documents and letters found at the house led investigators to the small town of Embu in Brazil. They had come to exhume the body of a man who'd apparently died 6 years earlier in 1979. The name on the gravestone was Wolfgang Gerhard. But after examining the documents found in Günzburg, both they and Simon Wiesenthal were almost certain that the remains were those of Josef Mengele.
Who can be sure? But I would say 99%.
But 99% wasn't good enough. Investigators knew that only indisputable proof would satisfy the skeptics. Immediately, forensic scientists were brought in from across the world. Their brief? To leave nothing to chance.
we must be cold. We must be scientific, following the different steps of our expertise.
Using old photographs and fingerprints, dental records, even photo-skull comparisons, the body was examined in microscopic detail. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Mengele family were about to drop a bombshell. Through a spokesman, Mengele's son Rolf released a dramatic statement.
Rolf Mengele is certain that the body exhumed in the cemetery in Sao Paulo is the remains of his father.
Rolf not only knew his father was dead, but he was also able to reveal how it happened. In 1979, Mengele, by now a 68-year-old pensioner, had been swimming in the sea at Bertioga Beach, 40 miles north of Sao Paulo. Without warning, he had suffered a stroke and drowned. Still, the world wanted more proof. And they got it, as the forensic team published its preliminary report. The Embu skeleton was that of Josef Mengele. Since then, the arrival of DNA analysis has shown beyond doubt that the angel of death was dead. For 40 years, Josef Mengele had been one of the world's most wanted men. Yet the world, and Simon Wiesenthal, had failed to catch him. Several times, he'd been within touching distance of Nazi hunters, disguised within an Allied prisoner of war camp after the war, in possession of suspicious papers in an Italian jail, twice using his real name inside Argentina's German embassy, and in 1960, only inches ahead of a Mossad commando strike. For Mengele's victims, the fact that he had never been brought to trial remained a painful injustice. But there was at least some small consolation. Josef Mengele may have been the one who got away. But Mengele paid a price for his freedom, living half his life on the run, and vilified as one of the most evil men the world has ever known.